Good morning, Mr. West. How are you doing?
Morning. I am very good, thank you, and morning to your listeners.
Excellent. So today we are continuing our series on the Secondary Schools Football League and the upcoming presidential elections for the league provides an occasion on which we can get to know the candidates and to drill down a bit into the operations of the league, the plans that the candidates have for the league, and anything related to SSFL football in general. So my first question is, could you give a brief introduction as to who you are and what motivated you to pursue the presidency of the SSFL?
Okay. Of course, I am a retired principal. I have been with the SSFL for the last, almost 40 years. I am a teacher of mathematics initially, and I started my teaching career at Faizabad Senior Comprehensive, which was then converted to Faizabad Composite and now Faizabad Secondary. I spent almost 18 years there, and during that time, I served football at the school. I started my involvement with the SSFL in 1983 as a school representative. And then I grew to become the assistant secretary, then the secretary of the South Zone. In 1990 or 1991, I left teaching to spend a couple of years working in St. Lucia at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. When I returned in 1993, I returned to my substantive post at Faizabad Composite, where I continued my service in the school. And I didn't only do work in football, I also did work in track and field, cricket, and I supported the volleyball program. So I was really involved in helping the students with their all-round development generally, while at the same time teaching mathematics. In 2001, I was promoted to the post of, I took up the post, I shouldn't say promoted because I had to resign at Trinity College from Faizabad Composite as a teacher in the Ministry of Education to take up the post in a private secondary school, Trinity College East, as principal. And I served the next 19 and a half years as principal of Trinity College East. Trinity College East was a brand new institution, so we took it from the ground and brought it up to what it is today. Immediately on starting my journey at Trinity College East, we engaged in football, involved ourselves with the secondary school league, and we have been on the rise ever since. So generally, I am a very caring person with regards to young people. I have served as a volunteer teacher at the Youth Training Center in Aruca. I introduced my school to cadets, and in doing so, I also served as a principal appointed by the Minister of National Security to serve on a cadet force committee. So I have really been overall involved in development of young people in all aspects of their development. So basically, that's me in a nutshell.
So those extracurricular or co-curricular activities, cadets, is that something that you participated at school yourself?
Yes, I was involved in cadets in my first year at Presentation College, Presentation College San Fernando, which I attended as a young person. And I was always involved in sport. I represented Presentation College in both at football and track and field.
So what levels did you represent Pres at football? Did you play all the way through like under 14, under 16, and then the big
No,
squad?
I just played one season at the senior level in my final year. Unfortunately, that year we were demoted to the senior division. So I played at the senior division level just in my final year at the school.
So one of the things I want to discuss is the fact that the mandate for the SSFL is not merely focused on the senior or the championship team, but also on the lower echelons of the league, because the development of those programs is also part of the organizational mandate of the league. What thoughts do you have or plans do you have regarding that element of football and for the league in general?
Okay, one of the things that I did when I was at Trinity College East as principal, as well as at Faizabad as a teacher, is to focus on the younger student. So we did a lot of football development, and that is something that has to be brought to the table at the secondary schools football league level. I am not convinced that enough schools pay enough attention to the development of their players. And we have, as a footballing body, I think we owe it to our students, we owe it to the schools that are members to guide them and help them through the process of development of their players as footballers and as all-around student athletes.
So therefore, you are locating development as part of the philosophy and the mission of the SSFL. And you're saying that it's uneven and more of it needs to take place. There's, of course, the question as to whether too much reliance is occurring on schools in the broader picture of the development framework in the country. What are your thoughts on that? And how so would you like to distinguish the development from what has been happening?
Okay, the history of football in Trinidad and Tobago suggests that the majority of youth development in football has taken place in the schools. A lot of our national footballers earn prominence playing secondary schools football. And I think that it is incumbent on the secondary schools football league to help them through their development and transition, because education is not just about academic development and finding a niche in a work environment. It is about personal development of the individual. And one aspect of personal development is the development of the person. And it has been shown over the years that that development can take place for some in sport, and in particular, football.
So one of the unique things about the SSFL, it's a standalone entity exclusively focused on football. So unlike, for example, in Jamaica or some other countries in which there's an umbrella organization focused on multiple sports, the SSFL has the benefit of just being focused on one discipline. It means then that beyond just what's happening on the field, there's also the marketing of the sport, the broader embrace of bringing people into the sport. How do you envision that from an SSFL viewpoint?
Okay, part of the development requires us to produce a good product so that a lot of the development that is taking place with the individual player or the individual student athlete has to blossom into a product called the SSFL. And that product is what we take to the outside world for them to buy into, because the development needs support. The development needs buy-in from the general public. The development needs the fan-based support as well as the financial support. So we really have to improve the product that we produce as in terms of what we call the SSFL, to have that general buy-in from the public, from the business community, and to some extent, not to some extent, very much so, a buy-in to parents and colleagues within the school environment that will help promote SSFL as a vehicle for the development of young people.
So we're in kind of a paradoxical situation. When you played, there were lots of fans coming out to watch schools football.
Correct.
But there was much less commercialization around. There was absence of technology as well. Today, when I look at the SSFL, I see branded shirts, I see evidence of commercialization, and I see the tech component, and there's commentary and there's sports max and so on. But there are relatively few fans. You see students in support of their colleagues, but there's not that extended family, friends, neighborhoods, and so on that would have pertained in the 70s, the 60s, and parts of the 80s, right? That's not there. So the easy cop-out answer that people give is, well, people are distracted. There are multiple things drawing on attention, but that's the reality of the market. What can be done to bring those folks back to the game? Because secondary schools football is still the number one interested constituency of football, aside from the national team, if functioning at its best. So why are there no fans there?
I think we will have to, I can't answer you that directly in terms of why there are no fans, because there are multiple reasons. You did talk about the other diverse distractions that young people have and people in general have. We also have competing events. We also have a scenario where the technology has taken over. So we now live in a global environment. So we're not just competing with the cricket club down the road or the basketball net down the road. We're also competing with Barcelona and Liverpool and Man United and so on. So we really have to put our heads together to see how best we can help bring the fans, the numbers back to the SSFL. Right? The numbers really existed during our intercal season. And we really have to put our heads together to find strategies, probably get some marketing, professional marketing support, but we really have to put our heads together to find ways to bring the fans back to the game and back to the SSFL.
So there've been hundreds of past students, past players who have graduated through the ranks of the league, and dozens of them are abroad. But they seem to be an untapped resource. I know that some schools have an alumni base and they are tapped in. But in terms of the league itself, the league office, it seems that there's an insufficient number of avenues for those students to really get involved. I know that there's some prominent examples, like Shaka Hislop, for example, but largely there's still a lot of guys that are out there doing things in different locations who could serve as mentors for the current base of athletes more formally. And this is evident when you go to the league's website. It is not what a website should be in 2021. There's not sufficiently current information. I mean, it's better than most, but there's still, in terms of the presentation and the range of things that it covers, there's a disproportionate kind of relation between the interest in the league and what you see when you go to the website. Is that on your radar?
Definitely it is, because part of the requirement to attract this generation of support and this generation of followers is the use of the technology. And there is a need to update our availability of data, to improve our collection and presentation of data that will allow someone to say, let me go find information on this or that in secondary schools. Let me see how many of our past footballers, our past, well, I'm trying to refrain from saying the word greats, but our past footballers, and see where they are at this stage, how many of them do we have in college? Because one of the things that I encountered in terms of challenges with my own students at Trinity College East is that those who have gone to college find it difficult staying in touch with the national body to make themselves available for selection or even scouting. So I don't think the SSFL can help in terms of being able to pull together the location and the activity of our past players. And that is something that can be done using the technology.
So the country is split into zones. Which zone would you identify as the weakest of the zones in terms of play and infrastructurally and so on? And I ask that because part of the process of improving and developing the league is also to identify where there are weak links and where there are opportunities for showing up the overall body.
All right. Well, we have those those zones that had the head start in terms of the initial startup of the SSFL. That would be the north and south zones. Those seem to be the stronger of the zones. East Central and Tobago have played catch up with them, and some of them have been doing a good job at catch up, and not so much others. But you also have to take into consideration the number of schools within each zone, because our zones are divided geographically and not necessarily divided equally. And therefore, it would seem as though some zones are taking longer to catch up to the front runners than others. So a lot of work will have to be put into helping the development, and that is part of the overall development. If we can bring the attractiveness back to the SSFL, it will help the development of the zones, and in addition, it will also, as a downflow, it will also help the development of the individual schools.
So what does the SSFL do well currently?
execute a league. To put it in simple terms, we execute a league extremely efficiently. We have a very short window of 3 months, and we execute a number of different competitions for a number of different age groups for over 100 plus schools. So that's what we do very efficiently.
And what would you say it does poorly?
I think its weakest area is having a common focus for all schools. I think if we can identify a common focus, a common objective, because different schools have different focus in terms of their participation in the league. And when we are so divided, it is difficult for us to move forward as a unit.
So what would be an example of the variation in foci among the schools?
Okay, so some schools have a focus on using football to obtain scholarships for their players or for their students. Some schools look at it as just an opportunity to keep some of our students busy during the day, right? So the participation, the interest, the focus, the effort to prepare and present a team is not as intense as some other schools do it. So there's a varied interest and there's a varied effort in the participation of schools at the Secondary Schools Football League.
But is there a common budgetary allocation for football at each institution as a baseline budget?
No, there's not. There's not. Each school allocates its own funding to their football program, right? And depending on the school's resources, some schools outstrip others in terms of the quantum, the amount of money dedicated to football and football development. And that's a major difference.
So therefore, the teams in the top tier and the teams in the second tier, there's still an intermingling of purpose, of expectation. Although we would expect that the traditional participants in the top flight are more or less dedicated to winning and tossing resources in that direction. But just as would happen in the pro leagues, a team that achieves promotion could quickly go back down if not capacitated to fund at that level or prepared for that. But what is the incentive when they go up? Is there any monetary reward, or does anything change, or are they still playing with the same budget framework that they had before?
The financial reward of participating in Secondary Schools League is not an incentive for participation. The money is just not there to make participating a financial benefit for schools. Schools benefit, they see their benefit of participation differently. And as I indicated, if it is that some schools are focused on helping their students in terms of scholarships, in terms of their future academic development, then that is the interest that particular school will put into the football. And therefore, that will determine the amount of money that they're willing to spend on football. But as I said, it's really different for each school. It is really, and in some schools it's different by generations. And it really depends on the focus and interest of the leader of the school, the principals, to determine to what extent do I invest in football for my students.
So in it, we alluded to budget, and in 2017, there was a fairly prominent incident involving Faizabad, and there was also another incident regarding how schools make their own private commercial arrangements. What sorts of uh, things or policies or mechanisms have happened with respect to those two incidents by way of corrective measure? Has there been now a settled, decided policy as to what will happen?
Our supervision of registration and player participation has improved so that we can keep track of the legitimacy of each player. So that is the mechanism that we use to manage a repeat of the Faizabad incident. But really, the competitiveness of some schools and the in-depth involvement of their respective alumni allow them to be able to attempt to fund the football to the extent that it is self-sufficient and its benefits to the school is achieved, so that we have, for instance, that some schools spend quite a large sum of money during that 3 months, I should say, well, not 3 months, 3 months of football, but sometimes it goes into about 7 or 8 months of including preparation. So a large sums of money is spent by some schools, and therefore it has become the new norm now, where schools, some schools that is, who can attract sponsorship, go out and look for sponsorship. And of course, if you are carrying a sponsor, you have to seek the interests of your sponsor. The SSFL cannot compete financially with commercial sponsorship. And therefore, we have to balance the interests of the school in terms of their needs to seek funding and the interest of the league in terms of trying to create a level platform for all schools to participate.
So you don't see this problem festering and blossoming again, because money is always going to be at the center of the discussion.
Money is always going to be at the center of the discussion, but we have to, as I said, we have to find common ground in terms of how we see the SSFL, and that is something that the administration of the SSFL can work towards achieving.
So just turning page a bit, I recently sat down with two prominent women's players who have graduated through the ranks of, from primary school, secondary school, club football to the national team. And I asked them to reflect on their experience, both from the point of view of playing in the SSFL on the girls' side to observing, years later. And one of the things that they mentioned was that there's a difference in both manifestations of the past and the present. What did you have an opportunity to hear their comments, and if so, what thoughts you have about the state of the girls' side of the league?
Okay, I think the development of females in sports is something that we have to look at a little deeper as a country. Right? I don't think we pay as much attention to the female sports as we do, or female participation in sports, as we do the boys. And so I can give you the example of Trinity College East has a sister school, Bishop Anstey High School East, which exists on the same compound. And the level of work that you have to put in with the girls, because the girls are not, they don't come to you as natural athletes in the first place. And therefore, you have to do a lot of developmental work with the young ladies, which for some schools they are not prepared to put that kind of effort into to a girls program. So you really have to, in order to have development of girls football, you really have to go back to the basics and to help develop young female athletes who can play football.
So one of the propositions made by those senior players was that there needs to be a restructuring that links the primary school organization with the secondary school organization so that there is a smoother sharing of capacity and maybe even programs, because you mentioned developmental stuff. So maybe having a better linkage would be beneficial in the context of girls specifically, because the boys have, for better or worse, a longer history, more established structures, and perhaps a more rapid way of remedying any problems that develop, also larger numbers of participants. So what thoughts do you have on being able to blend primary and secondary when the umbrella organizations are distinct?
Okay, you mentioned earlier the fact that a number of different countries have umbrella organizations for their school sports, their high school sports. That is something that it is not at the forefront of my thoughts, but it is something that is there because I think we have to pull together our different organizations to help the overall development of our young people. So there is really a need for an umbrella organization that links primary and secondary sporting organizations, as well as an umbrella organization that links the varying disciplines together. Because in the end of the day, we all want, I would assume, we all want to get to the same objective. That is the development of our young people. And therefore, I think as president of the SSFL, our first objective is to get our house together. Once we've gotten our stuff together, then I think we can begin to reach out to other organizations, to other sporting organizations, and to organizations at the primary and post-primary level, so that we can make a greater impact on the development of the country as a whole.
So you would also, it seems, be open to having some sort of stakeholder participation or feedback, because it seems like both on the boys' side and on the girls' side, the alums have some very good ideas as far as the way that things could be shaped to add some dimension, rather than the organization being insulated. Because really, aside from the people who are inside the entity, I think the larger public really doesn't have an idea as to the inner workings of the league. So could you shed some light on, let's say, structurally, like who's involved in the decision making? How is the whole thing structured?
Okay, the SSFL is what we call a principals league. For each school, the principal is the person that represents the school. But in most cases, as I have experienced myself, The job of a principal doesn't allow you to be involved in the day-to-day running and day-to-day activities of secondary schools football. So in a lot of cases, there are school representatives who are assigned by their principals. And again, a lot of principals leave that responsibility of their school's involvement in the SSFL to their respective representatives. Right? So the league really, its members are schools, and schools are assigned, schools on their own assign their respective representatives to help manage the league. The league is made up of a general body which assembles once a year for an annual general meeting or any other general meeting as the league requires to have. Its general management is done by a general council, and the general council is made up of the representatives of the top schools in both the premier and championship divisions. And the day-to-day running of the league is done by its executive. Right, and basically that is the underlying structure of the league. We try to encourage principals to be more involved, but we understand that as a principal, your responsibility is much larger than just the SSFL.
So a key component of the league obviously is the the welfare, the education, the well-being of the student and the student athlete. But there are some athletes, some footballers who are obviously distinguished enough to have the ability and the desire to pursue the professional opportunity. But how does the league blend that incidentally, or does it blend that intentionally? I know you alluded to the fact that some schools are more focused on the competitive side of the league, and others are there more so for, let's say, a co-curricular participation. But when you have a disparity in some student athletes who are going to be destined for the professional ranks, and you have others who could be, but aside from SSFL, we still have some very unclear structures outside of the secondary league. So it sort of becomes by default the principal playing location for a promising footballer. How do you blend that with just the basic mission?
Well, it is something that we have to look at, because if we are touting the fact that we are here for the development of the student athlete, then it is necessary for us to be involved in more than just the opportunity for the student athlete to participate. And but for now, what happens is that each school has its own interest, and each school has its own program and structure. That at this time is not managed or overseen by the SSFL. So I think the SSFL has to discuss with its membership in depth how much do we get involved, and in what manner do we get involved in the overall spin-offs of participation of football in Trinidad and Tobago, so that we can help other schools get to the stage where they too, on a regular basis, are sending their students out on scholarships. Have students who not only attending school to ensure that they play in the intercol final, but they're attending school and they're participating because they see a path to an education or they see a pathway to a career?
So a lot of times what happens is there's a promising footballer, word gets to him, there's a scholarship opportunity, the player disappears, his peers know that he is gone or she's gone, but they don't really know the way it's happened. So it comes across as if it's randomized. Would not having a centralized sort of type of clearinghouse feature at the league office, let's say where the league has identified 50 of the top performers that have balanced academics and have performed on the field, and you have that huge database in the league office, so that if Coach Joe calls from Georgia or calls from Texas or calls from wherever, everything is there, properly documented, perhaps provided from the schools, but it's there. And I submit that because there will be some players on the cusp who don't have the institutional resources at their schools, but they have the ability, right? They may come from a school that doesn't have that traditional level in football, but they are participating in the league. Usually what happens is that player is really reliant on a coach in the country seeing him and saying, hey, come play at this club or that club. Whereas they also lose out on the prospect of another opportunity, because sometimes they think that the level required for them is way beyond what it actually is for them to be able to go out and have a collegiate career and to get an education and so on. So what sort of remedial approach could be taken to mitigate some of that loss that we traditionally have had?
I think one of the things that we have to do is start with our data collection. We have to have data on our players and their participation and involvement in football in Trinidad and Tobago to encourage the schools in the US, the schools who have scholarships available, or even the clubs, the junior arm of the international clubs who are in search and scouting for talent, to be able to come to the SSFL for information on what we have to offer. So we have to have that data available. So we have to have a database on our players, a database on their stats, because if it is that we have the stats available, and let's say a particular university in the state is looking for a good midfielder or a good forward or a good goalkeeper, we should have this, they should be able to come to the SSFL to get that information. And if they see the SSFL as the main source of the information, then we will have the opportunity to be the main source of assistance to our student athletes to get them out there.
So I'm going to move through some topics fairly rapidly. One of the things I want to touch on is the coaches. Is there a licensure requirement for coaches? Do they have some level of minimal competency that is established by the league, or is it a question for the individual schools to determine who ends up coaching?
At this time, it's a question for the individual schools.
Because again, structurally, that issue would augur well for the league if there's a uniform approach across the board. Because the SSFL, by virtue of having 100 schools, presents an avenue of work and opportunity for coaches. So harmonizing and ensuring that the level of ability is documented strikes me as a worthy enterprise.
Yes, it is. And over the years, the SSFL has provided opportunity for coaches within schools to develop their skill sets, right? We have provided opportunities for um, coaching programs to take place here locally and provided opportunities where we brought coaches in and even utilized our local qualified coaches here. And I see no reason why that shouldn't continue. But at this point in time, the employ of coaches really falls to the responsibility of the respective schools. And that is something that we will have to gradually eat away at in order for us to help gain greater control in terms of the quality and qualifications of our coaches.
What is the policy on age limits and participation in the league? I know that historically this was oftentimes an area of abuse. What is the current policy on that?
I'm not getting your question clearly.
The upper age limit for participation in the SSFL competition, is there an established upper limit?
Oh yeah, that is established and it's quite clear, and it's based on guidelines from the Ministry of Education.
And
right.
and that goes back to proper documentation, the registration.
That is correct. Once we have control of the proper documentation that the schools submit, we have an opportunity to verify the documentation presented to us for, during registration. I see no reason why we can't have that under control.
So the league has a long legacy, a long history. And I undertook the project of trying to compare what our sister Caribbean islands are doing. And I noticed a project in Barbados in which Arsenal of the English Premier League had a project in which they allowed for coaches to participate they allowed for the opportunity for a minimum age of 17 to get coaching experience, perhaps experience with first aid, refereeing, anything around the game, with the idea that it would build confidence and build exposure and perhaps provide sport as a professional pathway for anybody who is curious. Because there's a perception, despite the whole edifice of having a very well-structured league, there's a perception still that sport may be for people who are less academically gifted, and that sport is not a pathway that is worthy of being pursued, despite the fact that there are countless examples to the contrary. So what can you do with your potential platform as president of the SSFL to change the perception of the role of sport in the society? Because there are countless examples at which sport and politics have intersected in the last couple of years, and any sort of administrative error in sport hits the front pages. So too, capacitating people to enter the sports arena seems to be also something that could happen while you're developing players on the field. What sort of institutional framework is there for a student at Trinity College East who doesn't want to play, but can add something to the organizational aspect of the season? Is there any kind of structure that you encountered? What sort of role did students play around the football team?
Okay, we usually get, well, my experience at Trinity College East is students who have a love for the game, but don't necessarily think that they have the skills and talent to participate. And we have always encouraged them to be part and parcel of the organization of football. So we give them roles, we give them responsibilities. We have been able from time to time to use some of the guys who may have been gifted in mathematics to help a bit with some of the stats in the game at the school locally. We have been able to use some of the events at the school with regards to football for those students who have writing skills to be able to write about it and to promote football within the school. So that is an aspect of the holistic participation in football that benefits can be derived from if schools are so inclined to go in that direction. We also have the fact that people don't understand the benefit of sports in general in the development of students. And it is because that they don't have all of the information. And again, putting that information out there is critically important, right? Because people see schools playing football, they see schools winning, they see schools being successful, but how many of them really know how many of those boys who participated during the season or girls who participated in the season, because girls now seem to have a greater opportunity for continued education through football. And how many of them truly know how many of our young ladies and how many of our young men have benefited as a result of their participation? And so again, we really need to pull ourselves together in terms of being able to provide the information and to let the general public know and understand that football is just much more than kicking a ball.
So what distinguishes your candidacy from that of your rivals?
I've served the SSFL for a very long time. I have served in many different capacities. And my additional experience as serving the SSFL as a principal of a school will work to my advantage in terms of having an understanding of the experiences of schools and the administrations in managing football. In addition to that, I have always been an academic who has been involved in sport all my life. So I understand even better the perspective of the student athlete. Yes?
What are your thoughts on? Sorry, go ahead.
In addition, I have had the experience of taking a brand new institution, a brand new secondary school from that sits in the middle of the East-West corridor, from a underperforming to one of the top secondary schools in the East and even one of the top secondary schools for boys in the country. So that ability to manage and transform an institution is part of my track record.
How do you, the Tobago situation in terms of movement of teams, calendaring and so on is a long-standing problem. It's a long-standing challenge. And there, on the other hand, there's a wealth of talented footballers there. But at the same time, the situation has improved. It's not what it used to be 30 years ago, for sure, there's an improvement in the connection between the islands. But knowing the challenges that exist, what do you see as the main challenge, and what can be done to reduce the disadvantage that Tobago student athletes have been at and are at in terms of generating opportunities, because there have been very well publicized instances of students having to come to an institution in Trinidad in order to really fully tap into the range of possibilities.
Right. I think the fact that we have improved our transportation system is a big fillip in terms of being able to have a greater connection between Trinidad and Tobago with regards to the football and the playing of football. And I look forward to the port of Toko, which will allow us a 20-minute ride or 15-minute ride across to Tobago to help further bridge the gap between the footballer in Speyside and the footballer in Cedros. But yes, it is a challenge. It is not just a challenge for us in secondary schools, but it's even a greater challenge for most national sports. So we have to continue our communication, continue our accommodation of Tobago and footballers in Tobago in the overall landscape of SSFL. Right? Because I can tell you that while I was at Faizabad, I had a very good working relationship with Bertil Sinclair. And we had a number of opportunities to exchange, where he would visit here and visit down south, as far south as Faizabad. And Faizabad would repay that in kind. So that really we need to take the opportunity to encourage more and to facilitate more the participation of Tobago football, Tobago schools, and Tobago footballers in the SSFL and the SSFL's program.
So I view this election as sort of the beginning of a new era, the ending of a period. Your wealth of experience in the league obviously recommends knowledge of the league, not having to spend time learning the ins and outs of what to do, and having a network and so on. But if I am to play devil's advocate, I have to ask you, in what way will you break from the past? How will you innovate? What projects change? What will be a different dimension to the leadership of the league?
Part of my personality encourages me to explore new avenues and to not be afraid of venturing forth into new horizons. That was the hallmark of my stewardship at Trinity College East, because while there, I didn't just do things the traditional way. I innovated a lot. I was still there during the initial stages of the pandemic, and our transition from face-to-face classroom to online teaching took place in a matter of days over a weekend, because of the fact that the school dabbled in technology long before it was necessary for us to be involved in that level of technology. We were involved in virtual teaching and blended teaching long before it was required and become a necessary part of schooling. So I am a person who is not afraid to delve into the unknown, to do new things and to challenge myself in new avenues. So that is what I bring to the table, right? It is usually safe for us to continue to do things the way it has always been done. That's a safe approach. I am not that necessarily not that type of individual. I don't take wild risk, but I do take risk because of the fact that if we are to make changes, we cannot continue to do the same thing over and over again.
So as we close, I have two things that I want to touch on briefly. One is, if we were to map the SSFL in the broader context of an organizational chart, what is the SSFL's sort of day-to-day interaction, if any, with the Ministry of Education? What is its direct line, if any, interaction with the Ministry of Sport? And then by the same token, how does it relate to the TTFA?
Okay, so that's three major links that we all part of. We link with the Ministry of Education because we are basically under the Ministry of Education in terms of our involvement, because it's a schools league, it's a secondary schools league. And our representatives are principals who take their mandate from the Ministry of Education. So the Minister of Education is our patron. So we are guided by the rules and guidelines of the Ministry of Education in all that we do. The Ministry of Sport, our relationship there has started to grow. We took a huge leap when we had Anthony Creed as our president, in terms of engaging this Ministry of Sport in what we do on a day-to-day basis. And I trust under my tenure that will continue. And I think our relationship with the TTFA, I'm hoping that it can grow. It can grow to a stage of mutual respect. It can grow to a stage of shared vision particularly for the young people of Trinidad and Tobago.
And then one of the closing questions here is, what sort of academic safeguards exist to preclude, a student athlete, a footballer, just, being present, playing, training during the season, and then disappearing, and maybe not even being in school the following term? What expectations exist aside from within the individual schools, but how and to what extent is there any safeguard? Because we know that it's a very grueling process to be playing and preparing for exams. Plus all the attendant social issues and so on as well, depending on the students involved.
Okay, but that is asking the SSFL to get into the running and management of schools. Really and truly, the attendance and participation of a student in school activity, including participation in the classroom, is really the responsibility of the principals and ultimately the Ministry of Education. We have set some academic guidelines with regards to transfer students. And we have been guided by the Ministry of Education in terms of our criteria for transfers and the participation of students in football that are moved from one school to the next. But really, I don't think we can dwell into the area of managing or controlling or even supervising the students' attendance at school. That is really the portfolio of a principal.
So in making your pitch to your peers and your general interactions, how have you been presenting your candidacy? What would you say to the public in Trinidad and Tobago as you wrap up? How would you summarize why you would be the most dynamic representative as president of the SSFL?
All right. That falls in 3 areas. One, the data speaks for itself in terms of my participation in education and in sport simultaneously, both as a student athlete, as a teacher, and as a school administrator. And the SSFL manages student athletes. The other aspect of what I bring to the table is my management expertise. The data speaks for itself in terms of how I've been able to, over a 20-year period, take a school of unknown quantity and to have it established as a school that is known in almost every aspect of school life. We win scholarships. We have a high pass rate at the CSEC level. We are now up to our best year of 94% full certificates. We have won national titles in football, cricket, basketball, swimming. We have won Schools Panorama on a number of occasions. We have won Secondary School Drama Festival. We have done almost everything that as I used to tell parents, anything that you want to see your son involved in at Trinity College East, you let us know and we'll make it happen. The third aspect is my experience in many different aspects of what it takes to contribute to football. I've been a player, not of very high quality, but I've been a player. I've been a coach. I've won a few age group titles as a coach at Secondary Schools Football League. I've been an administrator in football, manager of teams, and I have been an administrator at the Secondary Schools Football League level. So that in a nutshell speaks to itself in terms of why I feel that I'm the best candidate for the presidency of the Secondary Schools Football League at this time.
Well, the election is on Thursday. We wish you well. Thank you for spending the past hour with us, detailing the ins and outs of the SSFL from your vantage point, a very experienced vantage point. And perhaps we will be having a subsequent discussion on the other side of the election. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for exposing the SSFL to the public and your interest and continued dedication to sports and to football in general. You have a blessed day.
You too. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.